Hey, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. At AFN, one of our fundamental beliefs is that change is where opportunity happens. Maybe we're experiencing a lot more change than we want at different times in our lives, but the best way to take advantage of change is having a network that's diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. So we have our fireside chats to help us actually gain more of this perspective of different folks who are experts in their field. Today we've got John Previtera and Kellie Mix with us. Both of them are executive coaches and practitioners of leadership development. John spent 30 years in the Navy, mostly as a Navy SEAL, and Kellie graduated the Naval Academy and a Marine and is still doing Marine work as well, in addition to raising children and doing whatever else she's got to do to make things happen. Great to have you guys here. We're going to talk about resilience. Specifically, this is the first of a series of conversations we're going to have titled The Edge of Resilience. So when we think about burnout, really the point is not to be able to recover from burnout. We want to be able to give people the tools to deal with that before it gets too bad to begin with. And for those of you who may have looked at the LinkedIn messages ahead of time that have been sent out, John actually has a joke that he would like to share relative to this. So, John, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Not my joke, but if you dialed in because of Betsy's teaser about the Navy SEAL and the Marine Corps officer having a conversation on resilience, I asked ChatGPT this morning to make a joke out of this that started with a Navy SEAL and a Marine Corps officer walk into a bar, and the bartender says, "Is this a leadership seminar or a burnout support group?" To which the SEAL replies, "Both, depends on the day." And the Marine says, "Wait, you guys get days off?" So that's ChatGPT's joke and our start to the conversation.
All
I know
right.
you guys routinely got 4-day weekends, John.
We busted. Yep.
Well, maybe the SEALs just understand more about resilience than the Marines. I'm just, throwing down there. One of the things that I have come across in some of the things that I've read and seen, Steve Nash actually said this specifically. He was a basketball player for Dallas Mavericks, Phoenix Suns, one of the best basketball players of the last half century. He said athletes die twice. Professional athletes die twice. A lot being around what they've had to do to get to where they are and how much their life changes after they are no longer a professional athlete. John, when I say that quote, how's that land with you? What does it bring up for you?
For me, that makes me think about when I retired from the military. One of the one of the one of the behaviors associated with high resilience or low risk to burnout is having an opposite world or an alternate identity that allows you to disconnect from your work. When I retired from the Navy, I joined the Navy when I was 17. I retired at 47. So when I retired from the Navy, my entire identity was interwoven with the military. And certainly I expected there to be a transition period when I got out, but it was a complete loss of purpose and not even understanding who I was. It was a strong contributor to my own third degree burnout scenario that happened not soon afterwards.
Well, when we talk about like first, second, third degree burns, right? So first, you might be able to deal with in some way. Third is pretty big challenge that's in front of you, right? Like something significantly has changed and you need significant recovery time associated with that.
Sure, it's important to pair the appropriate self-care to the degree of burn. A third degree burn is not, I need a day off of work so I can go have a spa day and get a massage and maybe go work out. A third degree burn scenario often includes stepping back and reevaluating what's most important to you in your life based on the phase of life that you're on. Maybe it even involves some coaching or some therapy from a qualified professional.
Kellie, when we're thinking about that same quote, professional athletes die twice, what's this bring up for you when we're thinking about this in the context of burnout?
I think it specifically brings up my athletic experience as a swimmer growing up, and I think I've had those two deaths. The first one many, many years ago when I didn't achieve that one goal I had been working for and had sacrificed so much along the way to get. Not achieving that goal was a first death in the identity of the athlete I thought I was going to be, not measuring up to that. And then the second death, a little bit more lightheartedly, was an open water swim this past weekend where I did no prep whatsoever. And I get into the race and realized very quickly how sore I was going to be afterwards. And so understanding, when you're in seasons that require more resilience or have additional pressure, there's a lot of prep work that goes into being the athlete you want to be and a lot of recovery that's required on the back end to make sure that ultimately, when I'm thinking about resilience, it's sustainable human performance.
So I do think that you were heavily aspirational in what you were trying to do from a swimming perspective, and I would say that there was a lot of success that was in there. You might not have been able to feel it right when that happened. I guess one question I'll put back to you is, who do you know that succeeded without hardship?
No one. I think that's a part of the journey, right? It's just how
Perfect.
you define it and your mindset around it.
Yeah. So when we're talking about burnout and resilience, this is not avoiding doing hard things. A lot of the hard things you're going to do are really important. Is how are you actually making yourself capable of doing them for a prolonged period of time? How are you making sure that you are able to do them as well as you want to be able to do them? So, Kellie, when we're thinking about burnout, just can you tell us what some of the signals are that you could recognize in yourself? And I would say feel free to talk about some of the physiological links on that too.
Yeah, I think what starts to cause burnout is when our body is in a state of chronic stress for too long. And you think about the hormones that are associated with that and the impacts. So, ways that you can start to identify a first degree of burnout, right, are around fatigue, maybe brain fog, depletion in decision making, or overwhelmed by decision making. And as you move through those degrees of burnout, you quickly start to realize how much your identity is kind of intertwined with the work you're doing and your inability to separate. So, in a second degree burnout, it's thinking of, oh, I just need to work harder, or I need to prove myself through this next thing. Um, and so, I guess, I don't know, did I answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah. No, that was great. All right. So, some of these things that are coming up, when you start getting into like, let's say second degree or third degree, what are some of the differences in mindset that you're seeing with people?
I would say some of the differences I'm seeing is, oh, my boss is going to fire me if I don't get this to him by end of day, which is the end of day for me is midnight, right? Or if I don't respond immediately to whatever text or email is coming through, it's the end of the world. Or maybe it's the ability to disconnect when you do go home from work, or when you go home from work, you're still thinking about work, you're still talking about work, you're still engaging with work. There's no off switch or that opposite world that John was kind of talking about to recharge and reestablish. The mindset just simply becomes, oh, I need to work harder and longer and for longer durations without recovery.
Well, and that in a lot of cases, we've assumed that that has been a virtue through much of our life is to keep on cranking away. Like I'm the person here who can work the hardest. So we thought about this as terms of like, hey, what's some of the stuff that we're feeling? John, when you think about seeing this in someone else, what are some of the signals that you would look for to say like, hey, all right, this person is falling somewhere on the burnout scale right now.
Just to go back for a quick
Yeah,
second,
go ahead.
because Kelly mentioned mindset and gave us that perspective. I think it's so important we talk about the other side of that coin as well. Kelly also mentioned stress. I like to refer to it as pressure because stress is, we talk about so many different stresses, acute stress and chronic stress and eustress and good stress and bad stress. And if we look at it from a different mindset, like Kelly was saying, and look at it, stress is the way that we react to the event. The event itself is just pressure, and pressure can be something that we use to add focus and increase our performance. If I were from a leadership perspective, I mean, burnout is not just a term that we throw around. It is defined. Although it's not in the DSM, there have been lots of peer-reviewed studies done initially focused on the medical community, but burnout is measured by exhaustion, efficacy, and detachment. So if we were, as leaders, observing our team and we saw somebody who had previously been a very committed, very dedicated person with a strong sense of ownership, start to shift away from that to a nonchalant, blasé, I don't care one way or another what the outcome is. I'm just here punching the clock or collecting a paycheck. That could be a very good indicator that we've got an issue and we might need to have a sit down and do some exploratory discussions.
John,
And
if I could,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go
Sorry.
ahead.
Please.
Oh, I was just going to say that more recently, or I guess, I don't know, 2019, the World Health Organization did classify burnout as an occupational phenomenon in which they categorized the symptoms that John just listed. And what's interesting, so while it's not categorized as like a psychological disorder at all yet, certain European countries have actually implemented workplace policies around ways to compensate workers during periods of burnout. So while it's not in the DSM, there is a lot of discussion, I think, um, across different communities about how to, yeah.
Yeah, Kelly, I think the WHO refers to it as an occupational syndrome.
Mhm.
And it's a
John,
symptom of other serious medical stuff like true depression.
when you were talking, John, about some of the things that you'd recognize in other people, part of what struck me there is that might be later on in the burnout scale of things. Like when you're saying someone actually actively disengaging might be second or third degree burn. And so part of my concern is, could we even recognize that first degree burn when someone's feeling it? Because it doesn't show up as like dramatically different behavior. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it comes down to having a solid baseline of your people, keeping your finger on the pulse with your people. Leadership, first and foremost, is about people, understanding from a benevolence perspective what is important to our people might give us those early indicators of, hey, something's off with John. I need to have a conversation and make sure everything's okay at home, or maybe the job's not as rewarding as it once had been. Maybe there's less growth and more perform. Depending on how you look
Yeah.
at it, something is off, and it's not necessarily be worn exterior where you can tell without asking.
That's typically not written in anyone's job description, I think, either. What we might see in people's job descriptions, particular leaders, is like, hey, make sure your team is a high performing team, but not really like keeping track of what are some of those things that are challenges for them isn't necessarily there. And so this is a responsibility that's not always obvious to some folks.
Well, and I think in the first degree burn, if you're not aware of where people are at, it's often behaviors that might be rewarded for high performance. So if you
Oh
have
yeah,
someone who is, ready on the spot, always there, and you're not showing signs of necessarily burnout or distress, you're just performing at like a high level, um, that behavior can get rewarded and reinforced and then lead to a second or third degree burn.
Great point.
I'll give you another example that you just made me think of, Kelly. My wife was a pediatric ICU nurse at Children's Hospital for 20 years. She was running the PICU when she came home from work one day with no pre-event indicators, came home from work one day and said, I'm done. I'm tired of zipping babies up into body bags. I quit. And she stepped back for about 3 months, and we had long talks about what was important with her future and her career. And she ultimately went back to work in a different capacity as a telephone triage nurse, decoupled from a lot of that pressure that she was in a different phase of life.
Yeah.
That Johnny on the spot that Kelly's talking about, when we're in our 20s, when we're in our 30s, and we're trying to establish our reputation, and we're burning the candle at both ends and putting 80 out, that may be great. But when motherhood or fatherhood or marriage or maybe an elder needs to be cared for, things have to change.
Well, I mean, your story, we desperately need people to be PICU nurses. We desperately need people to be in
Yeah.
charge of those. And it's like that is an immense amount of stress to be able to shoulder on a consistent basis. And I think we are lionized for being able to perform in those circumstances, but it'll leave a mark for sure. When we think about, we talked a little bit about burnout. Flip side of the coin is resilience. How do we define resilience? What does being resilient actually mean, Kellie?
Great question. I It makes me pause because I think there's a lot of different definitions for what resilience is and how people internalize it and interpret it. And for me, I think I keep going back to the word sustainable. It's like the ability to move through life in a sustainable way, that meets the demands of high performance. And so when I think of resilience, like one of the things that contributes to that is having like high values alignment and high motivation alignment with what you're doing, and understanding, you know, staying in check with when you need a break and being real about that. I think an analogy that kind of comes to mind sometimes, the way I've heard it, is like the rubber band, the ability to stretch and then come back to its original state. Um, I think oftentimes, though, we don't realize how far we stretch and then we end up breaking. So it's understanding what the breaking point is before you get there is what kind of how I think of resilience.
Great, great. John, anything you'd add there?
I I think about Nick Petrie, who wrote the book Work Without Stress, and has another book coming out on burnout. I think he defines resilience as the ability to navigate life's challenges without becoming overwhelmed by stress, which navigate life's rapids makes me think of, you often hear people say resilience is the ability to keep your head above water. Well, going back to the earlier conversation around mindset, Kelly, when I flip, if I can flip the mindset from stress to pressure, it's not the ability to keep your head above water. It's the ability to stay self-aware that there's no water. There's no water unless you choose that to be the outcome of the pressure. Kind of like Neo in the Matrix, there is no spoon. If anybody gets the Matrix quote,
There is
probably
no
not.
spoon.
There is no
Um,
spoon.
Kellie, I did really like your rubber band analogy because we can picture it. I think one of the things that's interesting for many high performers that are out there is they assume that they are actually that the rubber band is a metal link, right? And that metal link doesn't seem like that thing stretches at all or breaks. And you might not see it stretching. How's that land with you as I'm thinking about talking about those high performers that are out there?
Yeah, well, I think what comes to mind to me is a plebe summer rate, honestly, the fifth law in the Navy. It's not a real law of the Navy, but it's something that we learn and we memorize. And it's the strength of one link in the cable dependeth the might of the chain. Who knows when thou mayest be tested, so live that thou bearest the strain. And when I was in my early 20s and I memorized that rate, it was okay, don't be the shitbag, don't be the turd, don't be the weakest link in the chain, right? Um, and now I'm, more seasoned, have more life experience, more things kind of that create that pressure, John, that John keeps talking about. And when I think of the chain link in our individual links, I think of not being the weakest link, but how can I be the strongest link possible within the chain that I am a part of? Um, and what are some things that might cause my chain to start to shear or get microfractures or warp? And being hyper aware of those so that when they start to show up, I can address it sooner rather than later.
When we're thinking about, being able to help make the whole chain as a whole be stronger, and some of the resilience practices that might be out there, John, I know that you've really taken to heart the idea of thinking about those idea of like opposite activities
Yeah.
and what that means for, us when we're performing versus getting into helping us to recover on a consistent basis. Tell me a little bit more about that opposite activity.
I love the chain analogy, Kelly. That's awesome. Opposite activities can be, for me, It was all about exploring my own passions and interests outside of work. Whether that is, I love nature and animals. I now spend a lot of time in the outdoors. I like to say that the closer I am to nature, the quieter the voices are in my head, which is part joke, part
Oh,
real.
you know, you're getting old, John.
Also, I'm a man of service. When I retired from the military and I was searching for my identity and my purpose, what I landed on was you are a man of service. You always have been. And if I could change my mindset to what I do is in service to fellow man, one of the other things that I've done since retiring is I became a member of the local search and rescue team for my community. So I can give back and serve. And that opposite world, it's a whole different network of people. It's not it's not the echo chamber of a SEAL platoon that I grew up in for 28 years. It gives me outside perspectives. It helps me understand what's important to other people. And it just allows me to decouple from that other identity. Some other opposite worlds. I also spend a lot of time with animals. I got into breeding and training service dogs. Science has shown us across the spectrum interaction with animals lowers cortisol, increases oxytocin, all those neuromodulators that Kelly was talking about when we were talking about the signs and symptoms of potential burnout. A lot of them can be assuaged by contact with animals.
When we're thinking about the leader's responsibility on helping their team, Kelly, you were alluding to this earlier in thinking about like, hey, we might recognize it, but what are some of the things that leaders should be doing to help promote resilience within their teams and within the organization overall?
I think a simple question of when you think you're noticing anyone on your team and the high performers, I think they're just as important to check in with, of a simple question of, hey, are you okay? Here's some trends and behavior that I'm noticing, and I just want to check in. Um, Understanding, one of the tools we use at Sixth Wing is a user manual as well. And we talk about, this is how you get the best out of me. And then you do it with your team and you understand how to get the best out of them. And I think as a leader, when you understand how to get the best out of the individuals you're working with and then respect the boundaries that enable them to perform at their highest, those are some things that I kind of think about.
And so thinking about your team, like these are particular questions that a leader can be asking, like, hey, how are you? What's going on? And being able to play back some of the things that you're seeing. John, when we think about this at an organizational level, right, when it is not your team that is directly reporting to you, it might be two layers down. How do you create that culture of resilience within an organization? What do you want that leader to demonstrate to make sure that that high performance for individuals can continue on a longer term basis?
I think it's in order to create that type of culture, it's key for the leader to demonstrate some vulnerability, to be open and honest and share with the team their own challenges in the past, which kind of gives the team permission to have that conversation. I know I know in the SEAL teams the culture is to it's suck it up. Somebody else has it harder. I get paid to do hard stuff, and acknowledging acknowledging a, a burnout scenario, it might not necessarily be encouraged. Maybe fear of getting pulled off the team, mandatory downtime, whatever. It's not. It's the opposite culture that we want to create. I know the teams have changed a lot since I retired 10 years ago. It's the epidemic of burnout has caused leaders to become more aware of the troops and the way that they have given permission to the operators to be open and honest is by being open and honest themselves. Vulnerability is key. You got to build trust. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I just want to add two things when you're thinking as a leader in an organization is like thinking through what your teammates have going on outside of work. Because that's where the chronic burnout workplace stress that contributes to the chronic burnout loop that we're kind of talking about. And so as people move through life, You always think life is going to get easier in the next chapter, and then you start realizing, oh no, it actually just keeps getting harder. And so understanding what people have going on outside of work, I think, is kind of a fundamental thing. And then the other thing I think as a leader, what's important to understand, going back to the physiology of stress and the load transfer that can happen in a chain. Um, the way you show up to a meeting, the vulnerability that John was talking about, the physiology aspect, the hormones, how you are regulating your body and how you show up to a meeting impacts your team. So if you
Mhm.
yourself are in a chronic stress state and you have cortisol on overdrive, you don't have enough testosterone to show the confidence that you need, whatever it is, your team is going to be attuned to whatever body signal your body is putting out, whether or not you are consciously aware of it. And so I think that's just something that leaders need to keep in mind.
Okay, so it turns out your personal life can affect your work life, and your work life can affect your personal life. Who knew?
Yes.
Um,
Loosely, Maslow's hierarchy. What is the underlying issue? Not necessarily the symptom that we are seeing. If there's something going
yeah,
on
yeah,
at
yeah.
home that we're not accounting for, simple stress relievers may are not going to get the job done.
Right, right. Well, and I think Kelly, to as we're thinking about how the leader shows up, I would say keeping in mind that you're always on stage. People are interpreting your behavior, whether you like it or not, right? Like, you had a bad day. People don't know that intuitively. They're looking at how you're behaving around
Mhm.
this. So, as you guys have had the benefit of being able to actually study, think about burnout and resilience, and kind of get some distance from that in your own lives, when you're looking back, 20 years ago, what's one thing you wish you had known earlier about burnout or resilience that could have made a difference to you at the time? And John, we'll have you go first on this.
Oh, thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.
No,
You just looked ready.
if I could go back and have a conversation with 27-year-old John, just graduated from Buds from SEAL training, I would probably impress upon the younger version of me that this is an endurance event. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. And taking care of yourself along the way is key to being able to live a thriving life, 20 years down the road or 10 years after the teams, 12 orthopedic surgeries later. I could have probably done a better job and made more measured decisions on my own, advocating for myself. So advocate for yourself. You have to take care of yourself if you want to take care of your team. And taking care of yourself means putting yourself first sometimes.
Kelly, what do you wish you had known?
I think John mentioned Nick Petrie and some of the work that he has done studying burnout and resilience. And one of the patterns of behavior that he has seen emerge across high performers is their ability to accept that you're not going to get all the work done in a day and you have to be able to step away from it. And I think if I could go back and tell my earlier Marine Corps self, it's that you don't have to do it all in one day. And in fact, it's really unhealthy for you to try to do it all.
Great. And you guys mentioned Nick a couple of times in the assessment that they use from him, the growth, perform, sustain really gives a good idea on where folks are at in terms of burnout and what some of those root causes are. And that's some of the things that we use at Sixth Wing as well to help think about this. Before we open it up for questions, this is the first in a series of conversations we're going to have about burnout and resilience. John or Kelly, any seeds that you want to plant prior to us going to questions?
What did we decide, Kelly? We're going to make this a quarterly event. We're going to continue the conversation. So anything that we talk about today, we're looking for opportunities to deep dive in future events, maybe get more into the biology, maybe get more into the 8 behaviors that resonate across people that have a low risk to burnout. We'll also be posting stuff on LinkedIn, or you can reach out anytime to continue the conversation. What do you think, Kelly?
I agree with all of that. And I think I would just be curious when this community thinks of burnout and resilience and the challenges you're facing in the workplace. I would love to hear those so that maybe we can address them more specifically and how they're showing up.
Awesome. So what we're going to do now is we'll open it up for questions. If you got a question, you want to just throw it into the chat, you can, or you can come up on screen. Either is welcome. So we'll give you a moment. There, Brenda's ready.
I'm ready. Okay. So first
What
of
do
all,
you got?
this is a great discussion. Thank you both for your insight. Wow, I have so much to say, but let me just say that one of the things that I thought of in your conversation about resiliency, because that's a term that gets used a lot when in my work, when people basically take a lot of stuff that they shouldn't have to take. It's like it's a badge for putting up with
Yeah.
bad behavior,
Mm.
right? And so, I just kind of want to throw that out there and ask you, how do we balance that when it's almost like, I punched you, you didn't do anything, you're so resilient. How does the leader change a culture? What is our role in changing a culture so that that thing kind of gets fixed? And I think John, to your remark, I love the Matrix, by the way, to there not being a spoon. I want to challenge you in this way about the spoon. The pressures exist. They don't exist for a person. They don't exist in a vacuum. I'm looking, at the type of people that I serve. They're not sovereign in what they get to do. So many times they don't get to say, well, I'm not going to do that. That's pressure on me. I'm not going to do it. The pressure exists as part of them being a rookie, as part of them being the only, whatever that is, woman, person of color, those types of things. So just kind of wanted to introduce that into the conversation and get your thoughts.
The pressure is certainly real, Brenda, and I didn't mean to imply or infer otherwise. To add a little bit more to the mindset differentiator between pressure and stress, it said, Nick Petrie in the book Work Without Stress, what turns pressure into stress often is rumination. It's when we overlay negative emotion to a past event that already occurred or to a future event that may or may not ever occur at all. And it's that rumination that creates that never-ending loop or cycle of we're now in sympathetic, we're in fight or flight, we can't get out of it. And it has such a debilitating effect on us. That's not to say that planning about a future event or contingency planning is a bad thing. Contingency planning is we can reflect backwards and pull out lessons learned, and we can reflect objectively, keeping emotion out of it. What did we say we were going to do? What did we do? What actually happened? And what lessons can we pull forward? Or if we're planning for the future and we are identifying potential contingencies, it stays objective and doesn't become negative or emotional. That, for me, is a clear way to separate. Okay, this is pressure. It's real for whatever reason or variable we're accounting for, but we don't have to allow it to turn into stress. And I know it's very easy to say that. It's more a mindset shift to try and act as a guidepost along the way, along the journey.
Okay.
And one of the things I've heard both John and Kelly talk about in the past is like when you're feeling the emotion, if you call it out, right, that actually helps you regain some of that objectivity. It's
Acknowledging it.
yeah, it's like you're no longer in the emotional state. You actually have to engage the logic circuits a little bit more to say like, hey, how am I acting right now? Um, and so it's for the person to say like they can call out their own emotion. You calling it out for someone else isn't always helpful. Helping them to see that is useful. Kelly, anything that you'd add there?
Yeah, I think that the way we interpret the situation, what John is saying, like pressure, stress, and how we think about it, when we think about things being a challenge or a threat and our mindset around that and what gets activated in our body. So when we view things as a threat. That's our fight or flight response. That's the cortisol. And it's the inability to get out of that fight or flight response, right? That was an evolutionary response way back when, and it was meant for us to run from danger. And the reality is most of us are sitting behind a computer day to day and we experience that fight or flight and we don't move our body. We just keep doing what it is. And so there's no release from that cortisol. And so the mindset around, is this a challenge versus a threat? And then what engages in our body without us even realizing it? And then I guess the way to get out of that mindset, or out of the stress response, 3 words that I've kind of been playing with are reset, ready, and relate. And these connect to 3 things that pull us out of it. So reset is connecting with your breath. Ready is the physical movement. Like, I'm just going to go for a quick walk to the water fountain, whatever, I'm going to step away. And relate is our social network and our social support. So who is that one person you can reach out to start to acknowledge what you're experiencing and going through?
Kelly, I love that you called out the fight or flight response in the common workplace, right? I've heard it referred to as biological whiplash, right?
Oh,
Our bodies are, it's like a sine wave or an oscilloscope. It's just up and down, and there's no outlet for those neurotransmitters that the brain is dumping. If you want to read a cool book on this, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, talks about this at the science level. If you're a science kind of person, it really explains it at a biological, physiological level.
the book I've been enjoying, John, is The Hour Between Dog and Wolf. And it
That's on
talks
my
about,
list.
yeah, kind of talks about the physiology as well.
Mark.
Brenda, thank you.
Yeah. Mine's a little bit more intermingled. I'm using the analogy you shared, John, about it's an endurance event and not a sprint. And where you're doing endurance events, there's times in the race that you need to push on, grit your teeth, push deep. There's other times that you need to coast and let up a little bit. And the preparations to avoid hitting a wall are training and hydration before. And so I'm wondering, in the world of work, what are the training and preparation like hydration that you would do to be more resilient in the world of work? Like, what's that preparatory work that really can set you up for success?
Matt and I were having this conversation just the other day. We were talking about the SEAL workup cycle. The SEAL workup cycle is about 18 months of training and then a 6 to 8 month deployment. And the training, the preparation that goes into making you the most survivable you can be while you're deployed is not just there to allow you to lower risk to burnout and improve resilience, but it can also be a serious contributing factor to burnout, because when training is being executed at such a high level as to make you harder to kill in combat, that your body doesn't know the difference. You're still in sympathetic fight or flight while you're in training. For 18 months, you're going through this wave. So without the awareness, without scheduled recovery, to answer your question, Mark, scheduled recovery time, finding those alternate identities that you can connect to on your off time to recharge your battery, or as Nick likes to say, put a deposit back into your resilience bank. Proactive and intentional in recovery, I think, is key to that prep. In the workplace, take your cow. It's not a badge of honor if you've got, in the SEAL teams, it was, how many days leave do you have stored up? I had 90 days leave. That's 3 years of leave. I hadn't taken leave. I hadn't taken a vacation. It sends the wrong message to the leadership. Maybe you're not serious enough. In the workplace today, take your cow, take your time off. You earned it. Go recharge. Go hang out with your family or whatever it is that helps you recharge.
I love
What do you
that.
think, Kelly?
I remember Nick talking about the 1-1-1, the 1 day a month, the 1 long
Yes.
weekend a quarter, and the 1 big break a year. And his opposite world. Yeah, those 2 things together being useful. Sorry, Kelly.
Oh, no, not at all. I love I love the analogy of an endurance event. When one of the things I do for the Marine Corps as a reservist is we manage all human performance policy. And so the aspect of human performance as it ties to burnout and resilience is really interesting to me. Long story short, what do I think of as hydration and fuel in the endurance race? I think it's normalizing that periods of rest and recovery, what that looks like for your team and as an individual. It's normalizing that it's okay to take a break. I went to the Army's Holistic Health Conference last year where they brought in all of their human performance specialists to talk about, whether it was strength and conditioning or how do we support the tactical warrior athlete. One of the things they talked about was resilience and normalizing taking naps when we're in the field. And I don't know about you, John. Like if you were a leader and you were taking a nap, you would be like, "What are you doing? That is not acceptable behavior. You should
They'd be
be."
snapping photos of you.
Yes, yes. And one of the phrases that the Army used that I just loved is a nappuccino. And so they're trying to like normalize, like, oh, well, what's the best way to rest and recover and continue to perform? It's like, well, I'm going to drink an espresso or my cup of coffee and I'm going to go take a 20-minute nap and wake me up at 20 minutes and I will be ready to resume whatever it is you need. Hey, so and so, you've got the con during this time. And I'm mixing Army and Navy terms there, I recognize, but I liked the nappuccino and thinking of hydration and fuel. I was like, let's normalize the nappuccino.
Drinking the espresso before it
And
has
then
it
taking
activated. Is that
Yeah, so it takes about 20 minutes for the caffeine to hit your system. And so you will still feel lethargic and tired until that caffeine
Yep.
hits. So why don't you actually go put some money back in the bank, take a nap, and then feel like the superpower effects of caffeine when you wake up?
Okay, I'm cheating now, and it's perfect that Laura just cued her camera because we were in a call earlier this week, and Laura pushed something into the chat from Adam Grant that goes back to what you were saying, Kelly, about resting is not a waste of time, and it's an investment in well-being. And I'm literally reading from what Laura dropped into the chat right now. Relaxing is not a sign of laziness; it's a source of energy. Breaks are not a distraction; they're a chance to refocus attention. That's about the culture. As the leader, when you can demonstrate and emulate this is okay, watch my behavior, that is how you create a culture. To go back to whose question was that was Brenda that was talking about culture. Anyway, great stuff.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, guys. And it reminds me, there's a book on essentialism where he talked about the 10,000 hour rule to mastery. But the second finding, apart from deliberate practice for high performance and mastery, that they found in that research was the top performers were having 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. They absolutely banked sleep because it allowed them to perform better when they were practicing the next day. So that Nappuccino idea to reboost on the way sounds like a great one. Love it. Thanks, guys.
Mark, that was the talent code by Daniel Cohen. He came to SEAL Team One and talked to us prior to a deployment about that 10,000 hour concept, the idea of myelinating the nerve pathway to the point where muscle memory and cognitive bandwidth goes down for sure.
Laura or Christina? Go
Hey,
ahead.
Christina.
Hello, how are you? I would let Laura go first because she came up on camera first. But last year, I think it was last year when you had us do the resilience assessment through the adaption, and that was so insightful. Back then, one of the categories that popped up for me that I need to look out for was detached coping. And back then I was like, why? I don't understand why. But over time, I would find myself in situations where I would, oh, okay, this is why. This is why. This is where I react to other people's emotions and I get overwhelmed by it and I want to help and I don't know how, maybe it's out of my hands. So I wanted to, other than right now, it seems like I'm more aware of it. What are some other mechanisms that I can reach for?
Christina, you got me scrambling to my notes on the resilience assessment on detached coping. It moves your rumination. If you can detach or decouple emotionally, oftentimes that will lessen the amount of time that you ruminate on um, a future event or something that occurred in the past. And if you're not ruminating and you're not in that cycle, that virtuous loop of sympathetic versus parasympathetic biological whiplash, that can be that can reduce your risk to burnout and help you build some resilience. Other than that, let's talk about it offline after I've had a chance to review my notes. But did you score well on detached coping?
I want to say, let me pull it up. Give me 1 minute and I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Kellie, you got any comments? As
I think
Christine-
it would be more a question of the way I interpret detached coping is like, how does that show up behaviorally for you? And like when you are detaching from a situation, where are you redirecting your attention to not focus on what it is that needs to be addressed? So I know for me, as a detached coper or recovering one, and in my earlier years with less family responsibilities, I would, in the Marine Corps, I'd work really, really long days. And then what would I want to do when I get home is watch Netflix and go to Grey's Anatomy, right? And that was a detached coping mechanism for me to just like, I was going back to a barracks room. I didn't have any family, no one to like download with. And but I didn't view it as a coping mechanism because I just wanted a release from my day where I didn't have to think about anything. And now I can look back and be like, oh, that's where that was ticking over to being an issue because I wasn't addressing, I wasn't changing behaviors. I was just avoiding kind of addressing them. And so bringing awareness to like, well, what are some of the coping mechanisms when you feel like you do want to detach? And then how do you either build intentional habits to try something different or address, what it is you're trying to detach from, if that helps.
That helps. Thank you.
Well, and I think our common view on assessments is it's great to create some awareness and then for you to have a conversation about it, right? All this stuff just gives us an opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper. Laura, I know you went off camera. Do you want to ask your question now?
I have a question. I'm also happy to defer if anyone else has one, but while we're waiting for others to come up on screen, as we were talking about this idea of an endurance race versus a sprint, it had me reflecting on the fact that I feel like I have some days where I think I am very intentional at recognizing that I'm moving, this is an endurance, and I pace myself. And then I have other days where I wake up and the day immediately feels like a sprint, whether it's getting the kids breakfast and then getting the kids to where they need to be and then getting on my first Zoom call. And I'm accidentally sprinting all the time. And I don't even like, that's the new pace that feels like an endurance. And then at the end of the day, I'm out of patience. I'm frustrated. I'm irritated. And I feel like I'm not doing a good job of shifting from home to work, work to home, and just keeping up that sprint pace. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to how to think about that a little bit, and maybe even tools to help with that mindset.
Laura, I was reading something recently. I'm not going to be able to put my finger exactly on what it was, but it was talking about the natural inclination we have to surge throughout the day. Naturally, people surge at times where they are more in that sprint mindset. Maybe the timeline is compressed. Maybe there's a deadline that needs to be met. We surge and then we drop off and then we surge again. I think it's key to recognize that drop off time that's restorative, or it should be restorative. You also mentioned the transition from work to home. I think, speaking for myself, the transition, the pandemic had a lot to do with everybody started working remotely. Nobody was going to work anymore. Physically coming home or going to work gives you a physical transition process of getting in the car, going to work, being your work persona, coming home, you get out of the car, now you're your home persona. But now we found ourselves sitting in front of our computers in our house all day, surrounded by all the everything. Re-implementing a transition process, even if you are working from home, maybe first create a boundary strategy. Once we hit this time, I'm no longer in work mode. And to transition, I'm going to go outside and whatever that might be for you. But I think that's something that across industries, across genres, you name it, everybody is challenged by that right now, big time. Everybody was working 24/7 during the pandemic because we were all working from home. So a 12-hour day turned into an 18-hour day because you're right there anyway. And those stress levels just went through the roof.
Well, and the performance increased for a while, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was just like initially it was, hey, this is the world we're living in, and everyone's like, hey, I'm going to be there for everyone else. And turned out that leaves a mark.
Scar tissue. Yeah.
If I can add two things to what John was saying. One term, I'm still kind of researching it and I don't know a lot, but we know the circadian rhythm is like the 24-hour cycle that our body is on. I've been researching a little bit more about ultraradian rhythms, where it's like actually 90-minute to 120-minute bouts of work. And that is kind of what our brain is designed for. But oftentimes the way we structure our days, it's like 8-hour bouts of work with back-to-back meetings and no downtime after that 90-minute work. And so, Laura, I'd be curious if you had, in those days where you feel like you're running from one thing to the next, if there were like the slow down periods for 15 minutes, how that might change how you feel at the end of the day. And then the other thing I'll I'll offer, because there are a few women on this call, is the physiological drivers that impact a woman's cycle throughout a month, right? And how understanding where you're at in a 28 to 30 day cycle, those again are physiological drivers that are impacting the state in which our body feels and how we move through the day and the week. So, not to make anyone too uncomfortable.
Kelly Huberman did a bit on the ultradian rhythm, right? That's what he called it. Super, super interesting from a biological perspective. He's like, when you wake up, look at what time it is. Subtract 2 hours, and this is the time where your body's at its hottest. So your most productive time will be night. It's if that's what you're into. Huberman, he lays it down pretty easy to understand. I love that. I'm so happy you brought that up.
Yeah.
All right, we got 4 minutes left. So Brenda, you get the last question.
So I'm glad you brought it up too, Kelly. And I think the whole conversation around hormones, it needs to be normalized and not something that is taboo. And it's in the workplace. The question I would have is earlier on, both of you mentioned about, keeping a pulse on your team, noticing when things might be off. When is that what are the boundaries around that, right? If I say to somebody, you look awfully emotional, and it happens to be a woman, and there's taboo behind that, and so just give us some help around what the guardrails are.
I guess when I think of the women's health, I would view that more as like individual ownership for the individual to understand where they're at and how they're showing up, right? Unless the leader, I guess as a leader, it's understanding that women's hormones fluctuate throughout the month and that may be impacting how they're showing up, and extending grace during times or weeks that it seems a little off.
But even not even connection with the hormones, just like the term emotional, right? For certain people is sensitive. I just had an issue internally where, what we could have put our finger on might have sounded biased in some way. So I guess that's what I'm looking for. How do you put the guardrails around how you share with people when they feel off?
I might need to think about that a little, Brenda.
I think
Kelly,
one of the things we talked about earlier.
You think?
Sorry, go ahead, John.
I was just going to tell a story in relation to Brenda's question and give Kelly some time there. Brenda, when I met Matt 10 years ago, he was my VP. And one of the first things he said to me was, we are going to we are going to establish a relationship of feedback. We are going to give each other feedback so often that it is going to remove the emotional component and the discomfort associated with giving feedback, so that we're just constantly in the moment giving each other feedback. And true to his word, that is how the relationship progressed for sure. From a leadership perspective, I think going back to vulnerability and acknowledging first that we're human, therefore emotions are involved, period. There is no removing emotion from the equation. That's why we have decision-making processes. That's why we have processes, period. It's to try and minimize the impact of emotion. But we all know we will respond emotionally before we even realize that our emotions have engaged in the issue or the challenge.
Thanks. Thank you. And great conversation.
I think saying you seem emotional is much different than saying, how are you feeling right now? They get a chance to call out their emotions.
Okay.
Right?
That's what I was going to
Like,
add, Matt, is coming
Yeah.
at it from a place of curiosity of, hey, what's
Ooh.
going on? You know, and kind of like a coach mentality of, how can I help you? I see this might be an area of struggle. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, so we are at time. Clearly, we have discussed everything we could possibly discuss about burnout and resilience. No, that's not true. That's why we're going to do this on a quarterly basis. John and Kellie, you guys were awesome. Thank you for spending time, and looking forward to many more conversations as well.
Thank
Thanks for
you all
having
for
the
taking the time
conversation.
out of your day. Much
That's great.
appreciated. Great job, Matt. Thank you for making it easy.